Hey, welcome. My name is Pastor Kenney Bahr. I am the Coeur d'Alene campus pastor right off of 15th and Sherman here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I just wanted to say welcome. Man, if you're a part of our community and you're part of our church, here's last Sunday's message. Also, if you're new, I just wanted to say hello, right? If you want to know more about us, feel free to go to northchurch.net /Coeur d'Alene to know more about our campus. But more importantly, I just wanted to invite you to a Sunday morning here at North Church Coeur d'Alene, where you get to feel loved and cared about by a community of people who love God and who love each other. And so I hope you enjoy this message, and I hope God speaks to you. Right? He went on the cross for people, for sinners, and how our sins put Jesus on the cross. And today, we're going to talk about how Jesus rose from the grave, the whole point. Right? The reason we gather here today. Paul talks in 1 Corinthians 15, he talks to the church and he says, listen, our whole faith is built on that Jesus rose from the grave. Without him rising, we wouldn't be here. He's just another guy that died. Right? But Jesus is the Lord. He came to earth, and he died, and he rose from heaven. And I'm excited for today. One of the things before we dive in, because maybe you're in here and you're like, hey, I don't follow Jesus yet, I'm not a Christian. Why is Easter such a big deal? Right? Why is Easter, or a day like today where we talk about Jesus rising, why is that such a big deal? I've watched it for a long time. For me, it kind of like, I imagine, because I've always celebrated Easter. I've always gone to church since I was a little kid. And the only way I can compare it to is like golf. Here's what I mean by this. Growing up, I never golfed. Okay? Never golfed. I actually made fun of pastors my whole life who golfed. I just made fun of them. I was like, hitting a ball into a tiny little hole, that's your life and what you care about and spend money on, that's dumb. Right? That's what I would say all growing up. And pastors, I'm telling you, all they do is drink coffee and golf. That's what I thought. And I vowed I'm never going to be that pastor. I'm never going to be that pastor that goes and golf until I moved to Coeur d'Alene. Okay? I went out with Keegan one time. We went to this place, and he was showing me how to swing the golf club. I was rolling my eyes about it. I had these old hand-me-down golf clubs from my father-in-law. And he was like, okay, dude, hold it like this, swing it like this. I hit this ball, and it landed on the green, and I meant it. And I stood up, and I figured out, oh my gosh, this is it. Right? I had all the dopamine in my brain. I was so excited. I was like, I get why you're excited. I had this personal encounter of hitting a tiny little ball, putting it near a hole, and I am so thrilled now. Right? So thrilled that I went and got a trainer. Right? I had an hour coaching where he showed me how to swing. I go too often now. Well, I'll tell people, you don't need to work today. Just come with me to Ponderosa over here, right? I'm still not that good, right? Like if I go out, like Bill, me and you went out, Bill would just laugh at me the whole entire time, right? He'd be like, what are you doing? But I now understand it, right? I'm now swinging the club and understand, like I understand why people love this game so much. And all I want to do is learn how to get better. And I think that's how, when people sometimes, when we walk through Christianity, it's very easy to know about something and to know what Jesus did. Like, yes, I know Jesus died on the cross, and yes, he rose 3 days later. I know this. It's different, though, when you have a personal encounter with Jesus, and it changes everything. And so today we're going to be looking at two people who knew about Jesus. They knew maybe he rose from the dead, but they were so sad and they were heart-struck, and it says their face was downcasted, that they were walking away. And today we're going to learn, like, hey, what does it mean to have a personal encounter with Jesus and how it can change your life? You guys ready to dive in? All right, turn to your neighbor and say 4. You know what I'm talking about, like 4. Okay. I have hit 2 people golfing so far. Okay, it's true. I was at Ponderosa. I had to yell 4. I yelled 4 though, because I knew that much, right? And this lady, I mean, she's fine after a couple days in the hospital. I'm just joking. Okay, I'm going to catch you up though on the story that we've been walking through. Okay, Jesus, like I said, he's been traveling the earth, right? Spent 3 years on mission, is what we would call it, where he's healing people, he's giving messages, he's bringing people an idea of, hey, here's what the kingdom of God is. I am the Messiah. Then there's a Passover festival where Jesus comes in. That's where you see the Hosanna, Hosanna, the palm branches on the ground. Jesus, though, is handed over to the Pharisees and over to the Romans, and he is put to death. And so he gets put up on the cross between two criminals. And that's what we learned last week, like, hey, I am up here for you. Father, please forgive them. And then Jesus died. They put him in a tomb. 3 days later, Mary goes to the tomb, puts out some flowers, and she sees the tomb is rolled over. And there's two angels, and they're like, he ain't here. Jesus ain't here. He's alive. So Mary rushes back, tells the rest of the disciples. Peter and John apparently have a race there, and John wins. Don't know why that's important for you to know, but John wrote it down. Okay? He wanted to know, I beat Peter. Okay? They go, and all they know at this point is that the tomb is empty. That's all they know. They haven't seen Jesus yet. They're investigating, like, hey, we heard Jesus is alive, but we're investigating it. But there's two disciples that are on their way home. They spent their whole week, or the last 3 days in mourning, probably in some fear. Like, man, the guy that we've been following, that we've been walking with, has died. We're going home. Okay? And that's where we're going to pick up the story in Luke 24, verse 13. It says, now, the same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still with their face downcast. And that word downcast is not necessarily you're walking like this, but just shows sadness, grief, right? Your heartache, right? One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that happened there in these days? What things? He said. About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in the word and deed, before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hope that he was the only one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, on the third day since this all took place, in addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early in the morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us they've seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. I can imagine these two men as they're walking and they're remembering. There's this sense of like, my world has just been crushed, right? Everything I put my hope into, you can read, it says, man, like we hoped he was going to redeem Israel. We spent 3 years with this guy, and we thought he was going to redeem Israel, defeat the Romans. God's kingdom was going to be on this earth. And everything we put our hopes into came crashing down. So what are they doing? We're heading home. I was interested about this idea of like, man, they say they put their hope that he was going to redeem Israel. And I did a little research this week, and I found this thing called hope theory. Hope theory was created by Dr. Chan, and it's really a strategic way of how to accomplish goals, right? And you can do it with everyday goals, or you can do it with like big life goals. He talks about how, hey, you got to figure out what your vision, what you're putting your hope into. You got to figure out what tasks need to get done in order to accomplish that. What are some of the barriers you need to overcome? And then you kind of reset and say, hey, how did that work out? For instance, our family's just been kind of going, and so we have this desire a couple weeks ago, like, we need to deep clean the house. Like, this just needs to happen. We've been picking up, but we haven't cleaned the house, right? And some of the, big tasks was, Piper's not here. Piper apparently snuck in a peach into her room, my youngest daughter, and there was a stain in her room that I'm pretty sure was growing. Like, it was disgusting. So that's a big task. My garage was just the junk pile of our house, apparently. Everybody threw things in the garage, so we needed to clean that. That was another big task. And then honestly, one of the barriers, right, that we're going to face is just keeping two little girls focused on cleaning, right, and like finding time. Well, we eventually found time, right? We're like, okay, Saturday morning to 2 o'clock. That's what time we're getting it done, right? And we learned some things. We learned that Piper and Zoe do a pretty good job at cleaning up. They're really good at cleaning bathrooms. I was thrilled about that, right? I was thrilled. I was like, done and done. But sometimes, the problem with hope theory, Dr. Chan says, is sometimes you put so much work and effort into a hope coming true, and if it doesn't, you can actually create a reality that you're looking forward to, and when it doesn't happen, it will actually affect your mind and soul when it doesn't happen. Meaning, these two guys, they thought Jesus is going to be the one that redeems Israel. That here's some big tasks that we're going to run into. Well, we're going to have to conquer the Romans. Jesus is going to have to raise up an army. Those are probably some tasks they thought of. They were probably like some of the barriers, religious elites, Pharisees, not believing in Jesus, right? That's some things we're going to have to overcome. But their whole 3 years, they're visioning their future like, this is what it's going to look like. This is what's going to happen. And in 3 days, in 1 day, really, it comes crashing down. Gets flipped up on its head. And it gets them to the point where they're kind of lost. They're broken. What do we do now? I don't know if you guys have ever been there. You put your hope into something. You put your vision of your life into something like, here's what's going to happen, and it gets flipped upside down. When I was in Bible college, between my sophomore and junior year, I had a friend of mine who graduated and was being a pastor, and I felt deeply called to be a pastor. And he told me, he goes, hey dude, here's something I encourage you to do. Be a RA, be a resident assistant. This is going to help you with your leadership and leading people. And I already had a job at the college where I was going around to different camps and conferences and just youth groups and speaking. And then I would tell them about school at the end. And so I literally thought, okay, if I'm an RA and I have this speaking job for the school, I'll be pretty prepared. And so I put all my hope into this. Like, okay, this is what we do. Well, during that summer, I was working an internship on the other side of Washington, and I ran into one of my childhood friends, and when we were like 11 years old, we made a bucket list together. And we crossed off like a bunch of them. It was like different hikes, camping trips, fishing, hunting things. But one of them we couldn't do because legally you're not allowed to, was have a beer at a baseball game. That was more him than me. I could care less about baseball, okay? Okay, but, so we're at a Mariners game. And he looks at me and he goes, dude, today's the day. Let's do it. We're right behind third base. Let's do it. And so I did the hot dog, and we get a hot dog. I think it was like a Coors Light or something. It wasn't that great. But, right, brings it over. We cheers. And I'm like, boom, checked it off. I felt good, right? 2 days later, I get a call from the school. Hey, Kenney, part of being at the Bible college, you weren't allowed to drink. And they called me and they said, hey, we heard you've been drinking. I said, no, I haven't been drinking. I just had one. At a baseball game, told them the story, and in my mind, I'm good. This isn't that big deal. I'm not like deliberately breaking rules, but 2 hours later, I got 2 emails. Fired from being an RA, fired from my speaking job. You guys, I was crushed. Hindsight, I think it's pretty funny. But like in the moment, I was crushed. This was the pathway that God had me on. And I remember I had this Toyota truck and I drove it into the woods and I was sitting there and I was crying. I was like, God, I'm sorry. I failed. I screwed up. And I was just like, what do I do now? Like this was where I was heading and it just got flipped because of my own dumb mistake. So I went to my boss who I was interning with and I was telling him about it and I'm literally being prepared that he's gonna fire me. And he just started laughing at me. And he goes, you seem pretty broken up about this. I'm like, yeah, man, I can't be a pastor, right? Like, I'm horrible. I'm a bad person. And he was like, Kenney, this could be the greatest thing that ever happened to you. He started telling me, he goes, you're an RA, you're pretty much a police officer. That's not what a pastor is. But Kenney, you haven't been serving in a church or been a part of a church for the last 2 years. Because I'm constantly going places and speaking at churches, I've been learned what it is to be a part of a church. And he goes, Kenney, that's what you need to do. And it really put me on this trajectory of then getting involved in a church, being a part of youth group, and learning what does it look like to be a pastor and disciple people. I look back on now and I laugh really hard because I honestly think I put myself into a hope theory, right? Where, okay, here's all my hope is, and it got flipped upside down. And God said, no, I'm going to put you on the trajectory I had. So the moral of the story is the more beer you drink, the faster God will lead you. Just joking. That's not true. But oftentimes in our lives, we could be these two men where we find ourselves like our hope is flipped upside down. We're crushed. Maybe it's because we put all our hope into a relationship. And this relationship was going to make me happy. And maybe that relationship ended. And now you're asking yourself, what do I do now? Maybe you put all your hope into getting a job. And once I get this job, then my life's going to be good, and you didn't get it. Maybe you put all your hope into, I don't know, something, and you make a mistake like I did. Everything comes crashing down on you. Maybe you didn't get into the school you wanted. Maybe you were let down by a parent. Maybe it had nothing to do with you. Maybe you went to a church. Can I tell you, over this past year, I've met many people that have been hurt by a pastor or a church. And it's led them to be like these two guys walking home, not towards what God's purpose is in their life. And man, I just want to say, if that's you and you're in here this room, I'm sorry. That's not what church should be or a pastor should be. But maybe there's a part in your life where you can understand where these two guys have been because you put your hope into something and it got flipped upside down because it didn't happen the way you thought it was going to happen. And so what do these two guys do? They go home. They let it drive them away from what God's purpose is in their life. And say, I'm just going to head home. What's interesting, though, to me, is that Jesus is right there. Jesus walks up next to them, and Jesus starts asking them questions. What I love about this is, A, you see that it says they were kept from recognizing who Jesus was. But this idea of somebody walking up next to you, especially a fellow Jewish person, on a road away from Jerusalem, that's not quite uncommon. There's power in numbers. So for these two to be walking and somebody walking up next to you, that's not uncommon. That would be pretty normal. The other thing is, they're 7 miles away from Jerusalem, so they're a couple hours into their walk. Most of the time that you're traveling between cities, it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to take an hour drive to Spokane. A lot of times it's, I'm walking for a couple of days. So it's nice to have somebody just to talk to and just hang out with and speak with. And so when this guy walks up and he says, well, why are you so sad? A, they're a little weirded out. Have you not been in Jerusalem? We're all walking away from Jerusalem. Did you not understand what happened? They're a little weirded out by that. And then Jesus starts asking them questions where they're pouring their heart out to Jesus. Man, this is what just happened. Man, this is what saddens us. This is what breaks our heart. This is what I'm frustrated about. This is what I'm angry about. And now we don't know what to do. I find that in life, it's very easy that when your hope gets flipped upside down, you have two choices. You will either let that drive you away from Jesus, or you can let it drive you to Jesus. And in this moment, they're walking away. They've heard about maybe Jesus rising from the grave, right? It says that, well, some woman told us that Jesus is alive. We've heard about it. We know about it. But it's not enough for us to go searching about it. And we're focused right now on what's happened to us because our world's been flipped upside down. I think even in 2026, you guys, it's very easy to be walking with Jesus. Your hope is flipped upside down. And because we don't have a personal encounter with Jesus, we walk away from Jesus. And Jesus, the good news is right there. He's right there talking. He's right there asking questions. what I love about the story is where they don't see it yet because it's being kept from them, because of their sadness, because of how discouraged they are, but Jesus is still right there. I think that even in our lives, when our hope is flipped upside down, and we're in the middle of this, what do I do next? Where do I go? What do I do? I promise you, Jesus is right there. Sometimes we just don't recognize him. Sometimes we don't see him in our lives. Sometimes we're like, Jesus, where are you? And Jesus is next to us saying, I'm right here. Tell me what's going on. Tell me what's happening. And in those moments, we're able to pour our hearts out to Jesus and say, I thought this is how my life was going to turn out. I thought this was going to happen. Or we can decide to walk home. As the story continues, they tell Jesus, like, hey, have you been living underneath a rock? And they tell everything that's happened. And then you're going to see Jesus almost even get mad. And he goes, well, clearly, didn't this have to happen in order, like, for the Son of Man to be who he said he was? Like, didn't the gospel say the Son of Man was going to suffer? And it's true. If you look at the Old Testament prophecies in Isaiah, Zechariah, Amos, they all say the Son of Man, Jesus, is going to suffer. Jesus himself, in all four Gospels, tells his disciples, hey, just to let you know, the Son of Man's going to die. He'll rise 3 days later. The Son of Man, he's going to suffer, right? Jesus tells his disciples on and on and on. And what's fascinating is here's Jesus reminding them again, hey, this had to happen, right? Moses talked about it. Prophets talked about it. So why are you so sad about it? He gets frustrated. One of the things I enjoy is just knowing that Jesus constantly will tell us what's going to happen in our lives if we're listening. That Jesus will remind us, hey, I don't know where this even started, but sometimes we have in our mind, well, if I follow Jesus, life will be peaches. This is great. Where Jesus says the opposite throughout Scripture. You follow me, this is going to get hard. This is going to get rough. But I'll be there with you. And Jesus tells his disciples that, hey, listen, it's going to get hard. It's going to get rough. I need to suffer for the commandments to come true. But I'll be there with you. And Jesus keeps his promise. He's right there with them, even though they don't recognize him. As the story picks up in verse 28, it says, as they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on if they were going farther. But they urged him strongly, hey, stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over. So they went to stay with him. When he was at the table with them, he took a piece of bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. Can I tell you what's interesting? 95% of the people on the planet right now believe there was a guy named Jesus. Back in about 40 to 70 AD, everybody agrees, hey, for the most part, right? Like there was a human that was here on earth who was named Jesus of Nazareth. And yes, he walked around, he gave good messages. He was like a prophet of some sort. There's even studies that show that most people believe that Jesus did do miracles, right? That people believe like, hey, this actually happened. There's no question of like, was there actually a guy named Jesus back in the day? Most people agree. Where the difference comes is right here. Did Jesus rise from the grave? Did Jesus really come out of the grave? And I think what's interesting is there's a difference right now knowing who Jesus and having an encounter with Jesus. These two guys, as they're on the road, they know who Jesus is, and they know what Jesus has happened. Just like in 2026, 95% of people believe, yeah, Jesus died on the cross. The Romans killed him. We all agree with that. The difference for Christians is we believe 3 days later he rose from the grave. They conquered death. That he showed himself to 5,000 people. That he encountered people like these two along the road. And one of the things I love about this passage is these two guys encountered Jesus in an inn. They didn't encounter Jesus at some rock concert, right? They didn't encounter Jesus at a camp. They didn't encounter Jesus, right? They encountered Jesus, just the two of them, in an inn, traveling. In their saddest moment, Jesus was there. I can imagine being hurt and being like, man, what do we do now? And then you have this real encounter with Jesus, and it's just those two and Jesus. You're like, wow, like, it's no longer like, I think Jesus or Jesus might have rose from the grave like it was. It was, I know it because I got to meet him. It was personal. It was real to them. Can I tell you right now in this room, there are people that have encountered Jesus. I asked around this week and I said, hey, when did you encounter Jesus? And there's people in this room currently right now that encountered Jesus when they were 6 years old. There's people in this room that encountered Jesus at a Bible camp 14 years ago. There are people in this room that encountered Jesus in their truck driving home, pulled over, and met Jesus right then and there. There's people in this room who encountered Jesus with their mom when they were 5 years old. There's people that encountered Jesus during a rooted group, a small group of people talking together and realizing Jesus is real. There's a person in this room who encountered Jesus at a pub and realized Jesus is real. He's not just somebody we can talk about. We have people who know, not just go, I know about Jesus and I've heard about him, but I've encountered him personally. I have a real relationship with Jesus. I love that. I love that. There's a reality that Jesus says, not only was I raised, but I have a new hope. That Jesus didn't just die, but he rose from the grave to start his kingdom, and we personally get to be walking with him in that. There was a famous painter, some thousands, or about somewhere around during the Roman Catholic time. His name is Caravaggio. Then I think we got his first painting. He painted this encounter with the two disciples and Jesus. This is it right here. It's very famous. It's in museums. It makes lots of money when it's ever sold. This to me is a hilarious picture because if you notice right here at the bottom of the corner of the table, I don't know how that fruit isn't falling off that table right there. Okay? It makes no sense to me. Also, apparently they're having like a Thanksgiving dinner right there. There's a turkey. I don't know if that's like Hawaiian bread or like a cake back in the day right there. Jesus also looks like he's 12. Okay? I don't like, he's right there in the middle. He's doing this like finger gun thing, right? And his two disciples look like they're 56 years old apparently. Like, geez Louise. But Caravaggio painted this painting, and he was an up-and-coming young painter that everybody loved because of the light, apparently, like how he used light in the but people love this painting. You can notice the frame around the painting is like in gold. It's in museums. I read that the last time it was sold, it went for $7.2 million, right? What's interesting about the story, though, about this painting is once he painted it and sold it to the church, he then took the money and went to a brothel. Spent it all on prostitutes, right? Then he went to a bar, got super drunk playing some type of gambling game, and murdered a guy. Okay? That's the guy that painted this. What's interesting to me about this is I think it's very easy to look like you follow Jesus. I would expect the dude that painted this, I mean, this is a nice, I'm not a painter, you guys, I don't look, but I would assume whoever painted this must know Jesus, right? It's shiny, it's nice, it looks good. Here's this young guy who just goes and spends it everything but, right? Now, years later, Caravaggio actually ends up coming to know Jesus and has this personal encounter with Jesus and decides to paint this encounter with the two disciples again, but look how he paints it this time. This is the painting this time. What's interesting to me is it's a lot darker, right? And it's Jesus who looks a like any other Jesus we see during the day, right? He has this beard, but he's like the correct age, I think. But he's walking down this path that you don't really know where the path leads. And it's dark. This painting, I've come to find out, is not nearly as famous. I think I looked it up. You can buy it for $72 on like Etsy or something like that. Like people put it in their houses and whatnot. But can I tell you what I love about this painting? This looks like a real encounter with Jesus to me. You're walking on the path, you're walking down the road, and you come to find Jesus, and you're saying, where do we go next? Where do we go? And Jesus walks with you. Now, if I had a choice personally between the two, you think you go back real fast? I would leave this in the museum. I truly would. I would leave this in the museum, and I would put the other one up in my home. Can I tell you why? The first one, this reminds me of sometimes what we think church is, religion. If I just look nice, if I dress it up nice, and it's really shiny, and I look really good, then I'm following Jesus. And the reason I like the second one, this to me looks like a Jesus who knows me, who's walking with me. An encounter with Jesus that says, hey, I didn't just die, but I rose from the earth, and now we're walking together. And I know you're lost in the woods sometimes, and I know you don't know where to go next, and your hope might be flipped upside down, but I'm going to talk with you. I'm going to show you the way. I'm going to guide you. That's a personal encounter with Jesus. It is easy, you guys, to go to church and just go, okay, I'm just going to look nice, I'm going to show up on time or not, right? I'm going to sing songs, but then I'm going to leave it all at church and go off and do whatever I want to do. It's easy to do that. This is much harder, but this is a personal encounter with Jesus. And when these two disciples were walking home, walking away because their whole life was flipped upside down, Jesus meets them right there and says, I'm here for you. I want to meet with you. I love you. Not only did I die on the cross for you, I rose for the grave to be with you. That's the Jesus I love. That's the Jesus that I'm like, I'll walk with you. Who knows, you're going to make mistakes. Jesus never yells at them for walking home. He never says, what were you doing? You gave up after 3 days, you guys? Come on. He breaks bread. He shares it with them. And they remind, their then eyes are open to going, this is Jesus to me. Now they're going to go, and they're going to go share the gospel. But can I tell you what they're not going to do? They're not going to go, because Jesus chose 12 fishermen that do not know Scripture, that did not know everything. He chose 12 fishermen who just were sitting with him, who spent time with him. And he simply told them, hey, now go share others what you've learned from me. These two guys are going to go share the gospel when Jesus ultimately leaves earth. And they're not going to share this, okay, let me give you the 12 points of why you should be a Christian and the theological background of it and the history of it. They're going to share, I was in an inn one time and Jesus revealed himself to me. And I got to sit and hang out with Jesus. Jesus ends Luke 24 with simply telling his disciples, go out to all corners of the world, spreading the good news that I rose from the grave, that I am with you. There's a famous theologian named Spurgeon who once wrote that being a Christian and sharing the gospel, all it is you being a beggar and telling another beggar where the food is. That's all it is. That we're so hungry and we need Jesus, and then we finally find him, and all our job is to tell other people the good news of where the food is. That's all it is. We're going to be heading into a series starting next week in the book of Acts. Now, Luke writes the Gospel of Luke, but he also writes the book of Acts. And it talks through, hey, what does it mean to be the church? What does it look like to follow Jesus together? And how does it look like to share the gospel? Can I tell you one of my favorite parts? I'm excited for this series because they do a really good job at loving each other and loving Jesus. That's it. And people come to know who Jesus is. Can I encourage you this morning as we end now together? We're going to actually take communion together. Don't walk out of the room. Don't live your life just knowing who Jesus is. Just knowing, yes, Jesus died one day. And yes, it was a big deal. And that's it. That you have an opportunity, even today, to say, I met Jesus. I encountered him personally, and I walked with him. And so just like Jesus and his two disciples, we're going to break bread together. But this bread is much smaller. It's a little cracker. But this cracker represents Jesus' body that was broken for you and me. Not just broken, but so that we could have a relationship with Jesus. So we could meet Jesus personally. Let's take it together. Now this juice represents Jesus' blood. That not only did he die, but 3 days later he rose from the grave to meet with us, to be with us. That even 2,000 years later, Jesus said, I died for you, but more importantly, I rose from the grave so that we can spend eternity together. Let's take this together. Will you pray with me? Lord Jesus, God, I love that you are a God who just wants to be with us, God. I'm thankful that we don't need to have these big lights or fog machines to encounter you, Jesus, even though those aren't bad. But God, that we could be driving home, talking with you. God, that when our whole world is flipped upside down, we can come to you. That God, you have a purpose for our lives. God, I pray that as we leave here today, God, we could be like your 12 disciples, sharing the good news. Not from a position of like, look at me, look at this picture, look how awesome it looks, God. But of a position of, I have the good news. I know where the food is. Let me share that with you. Speak to us this week, God. Guide us to those who are far from you, who do not know the good news that you rose from the grave for them. We thank you in your name. Amen.